Hello and welcome. Can you think back, to a time when maybe you felt really lost, sort of adrift? What was it that pulled you back, that anchor? For a lot of young people who are grappling with really immense challenges, finding that anchor can literally be the difference between despair and, well, hope. We'll explore some incredibly moving research. It asks a very simple question, but a profoundly powerful one. What are your reasons for living? In a recent study in the journal Psychiatric Services, the research digs into a powerful, maybe surprisingly intuitive therapeutic tool. It's about asking teens who are at risk of suicide to actually articulate their reasons for living. We'll see the surprising and often really heartwarming insights from this work and understand how these deeply personal motivations, well, they aren't just observations. They can become powerful, really individualized tools for safety planning and treatment. It's all about finding out what truly resonates with a young person when they're at their most vulnerable point.
And this really is research right at the cutting edge. It just highlights how current these insights are. They offer immediate relevance to how we approach adolescent mental health in, clinical practice. It's about moving beyond just general interventions to something much more personalized, something that really clicks.
Before we start, I think it's vital we grasp the context, the challenging internal landscapes that many young people are navigating. Teenagers experiencing suicidal thoughts or behaviors, they often feel isolated, overwhelmed, and sometimes like they're a burden to the people around them. They're really at a critical juncture, and the need for effective, personalized, and empathetic interventions, we're talking about finding their unique anchors in a storm, right?
Well, this study connects directly to a foundational model for understanding these storms, the interpersonal theory of suicide. This theory helps us kind of map out the psychological terrain. It identifies factors like thwarted belonging. That's that profound feeling of disconnect, like you don't belong anywhere or to anyone. And also perceived burdensomeness, which is the really painful belief that your existence is somehow a drain or a problem for your loved ones. And when these two feelings intensify, the risk for suicidal ideation tragically escalates.
That really framed the depth of the challenge these young people are facing. So, okay, if thwarted belonging and perceived burdensomeness are such powerful drivers, are we essentially saying that consciously identifying these reasons for living is about reestablishing that sense of connection and value, maybe making them aware of bonds they might be overlooking in their distress?
Yes, it's about providing a counter narrative, a tangible anchor, like you said. When a young person can actually articulate a reason to live, say, my mom, or even my dog, they are right in that moment actively challenging those feelings of isolation and burdensomeness. They're affirming a connection, a relationship where they are valued, or at least where their presence matters to another being. Just the act of verbalizing it could be incredibly powerful, not just for the therapist listening, but for the teen themselves, and reorienting their focus.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. So let's talk about the researchers, the brilliant minds behind this insightful work. This research comes to us from Ana M. Ugueto, PhD, and her colleagues from the University of Texas Health Science Center. They really dug into something fundamental here.
They certainly did, and their approach gives us a really clear, practical window into this vulnerable population. The study used what we call retrospective data, so they looked back at existing electronic medical records, which can be a real treasure trove of information from a pretty significant group, 211 teenagers.
Okay, and these weren't just any teens, right?
No, exactly. The majority, 71%, were female, and all of them had been admitted to an adolescent psychiatric hospital unit back in 2023, and their admission, crucially, was specifically due to suicidal thoughts or behaviors. So that places them firmly within that high-risk group we really need to understand better.
Right, and what's particularly compelling is the kind of data they collected.
Yes, beyond the usual demographic characteristics, suicide risk assessments, therapy referral details, they zeroed in on something very specific and I think very powerful: the teenagers' stated reasons for living. This direct feedback, often captured at such a critical point in their journey, is what makes this study so uniquely impactful.
It's their own words, isn't it? Unfiltered about what keeps them going.
So they had this critical data, these deeply personal statements, but raw words, especially from 211 different people, they don't automatically yield insights. That's the challenge, isn't it? How do you take something so inherently subjective and, draw objective, actionable conclusions from it? How did the researchers actually make sense of all that?
Excellent question, and it's really where the qualitative analysis approach shines. Think of it like being a linguistic detective sifting through hundreds of notes or transcripts. It's not just about counting how many times a word like family appears, though that's part of it. It's about understanding how family is talked about. Is it my family needs me, suggesting responsibility, a sense of purpose? Or is it my family loves me, which highlights belonging and affection? Big difference.
So the researchers systematically determined the most frequently occurring words, yes, but then they went deeper. They looked for word-based patterns, common themes, common phrases, and maybe most critically, they tried to understand the contextual factors, the words around it, the sort of emotional tone that really indicate what matters most to these adolescents. This kind of analysis, it gets beyond simple statistics. It tries to capture the rich, sometimes messy reality of human experience. It gives real depth to the data that numbers alone just can't capture.
Okay, so after all that really meticulous analysis, what did they actually find? What were the actual reasons for living that these young people articulated? Were there common threads, or was it surprisingly diverse? What jumped out at you?
Well, what they found is both incredibly simple and profoundly powerful. The most frequently occurring words were, perhaps predictably, my, family, and friends. Just those three words, often used together, they immediately point to how central personal relationships are and that sense of ownership or attachment to those connections.
Right. My family, friends.
Exactly. And when they zoomed in on family specifically, mom was cited most often. That really highlights that primary caregiver connection. Siblings also appeared frequently, specifically sister and brother. It just underscores those immediate, often, unconditional bonds within the family unit, even when maybe those relationships are strained in other ways.
Interesting. And it wasn't just people, though.
No, not at all. The list of the most frequent nouns also included things like future, life, and goals, which indicates a strong pull towards what lies ahead. So you have family, friends, mom, sister, siblings, brother, alongside future, life, goals, and in a really relatable turn, dog.
Dog. That's great.
Isn't it? Yeah, the inclusion of pets like dog is just so human. It makes you realize that sometimes our most steadfast, unconditional companions hold a surprisingly significant place in our will to live. It's not always these grand aspirations. Sometimes it's the simple, everyday connections that provide the strongest anchor.
That really resonates. What about the verbs? Did they look at action words?
They did. Want and be were the most common verbs used, but what's crucial here is how they were used. They were typically combined with those nouns we just talked about, indicating life goals or career aspirations. Things like, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be happy, my future. Yeah. This signifies a really powerful future-oriented thinking among these teens. Despite everything they're going through, there's this strong underlying current of hope, a desire to live into a future they can actually envision for themselves.
Wow, it's incredibly powerful, isn't it? Just the simplicity of those words, mom, friends, dog, future, want, be, it sort of belies their profound impact. These findings really highlight how even in their darkest moments, these fundamental attachments and aspirations remain their core anchors. The connections to loved ones, the simple comfort of a pet, and a very real, tangible hope for what tomorrow might bring. It feels kind of universal, actually.
It does. And what's fascinating here is how these articulated reasons, they aren't just observations for a research paper, they are incredibly powerful therapeutic tools. Ugueto and her colleagues concluded that these individualized reasons for living act as unique protective factors. And this is where we bring it right back to that interpersonal theory of suicide we mentioned earlier. These reasons directly counter the existing risk factors. They illuminate how these young people do feel a sense of belonging, how they do have purpose, tackling that thwarted belonging and perceived burdensomeness head on.
Can you maybe give an example of how that works in practice?
Sure, let's imagine a hypothetical 16-year-old. Let's call her Alex. She's struggling with severe depression, feels totally disconnected from her peers, and feels like a huge burden to her single parent who works long hours. So Alex might initially express classic feelings of thwarted belonging, but then in a therapy session, when asked about reasons for living, maybe Alex quietly mentions my little sister, or perhaps my passion for drawing. Suddenly, the therapist has a really clear and powerful entry point. The little sister becomes a direct counter to that feeling of burdensomeness. Alex realizes someone relies on her, someone she cares for deeply, and the passion for drawing directly addresses a sense of purpose and self-worth. These aren't abstract concepts anymore. They are specific, individualized anchors the therapist can then amplify and build upon.
That's a crucial connection that makes it very clear. So what does this all mean then for the therapists on the ground and, of course, for the young people they're trying to help? How can these deep personal insights be put into practical action? How do they actually reduce suicidal thoughts and behaviors?
Well, the applications are quite explicit and practical, really going straight to the heart of treatment. First off, simply identifying these reasons can be tremendously helpful just for building rapport with a team. Imagine a therapist starting a conversation by genuinely acknowledging what truly matters. I understand your dog Max is incredibly important to you. It creates an immediate, authentic connection. It fosters trust right away.
Yeah, I can see that.
Secondly, these insights are just invaluable for establishing therapy goals that are truly tailored to what the individual values most. So instead of a generic objective like, say, improve mood, a goal could become working towards being able to play with Max in the park again, or maybe planning for a future where I can pursue my artistic talents. These are goals rooted in the teen's own expressed values, which makes them far more motivating.
That makes sense. It gives them something concrete to aim for based on what they said matters.
Exactly, and furthermore, these individualized reasons allow therapists to personalize evidence-based treatments. Standard therapies, things like CBT or DBT, they just become more effective when they're integrated with the teen's unique motivations. For instance, if a teen's future goals are a strong reason for living, therapy can focus on skill building that directly supports those aspirations, maybe problem-solving techniques to overcome academic hurdles, or coping strategies to manage anxiety about the future. It makes the sometimes abstract work of therapy feel much more concrete, relevant, and ultimately empowering for the teen.
So it's really about leveraging what's already there inside them.
Precisely. By focusing on these personalized protective factors, therapists can directly address those core vulnerabilities identified by the interpersonal theory, that lack of belonging, feeling like a burden, and provide a really robust framework to reduce adolescent suicidal thoughts and behaviors. It's about empowering them to build on their own inherent strengths, their own reasons. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, I think the study powerfully reminds us that even within moments of intense crisis, there often exist these deeply personal protective resources. These resources are our connections to family, friends, even pets, and our hopes for the future, our goals, our aspirations. The simple yet profound act of really listening for and then amplifying these reasons can be a cornerstone of healing. It can be a robust foundation upon which to build resilience. Yeah, it just shows us that hope often resides in the most intimate, sometimes seemingly small everyday parts of our lives.
Absolutely. This talk really illustrates how a seemingly simple, direct question can unlock such profound insights, how it transforms understanding into highly personalized, truly effective support for those who need it the most. It's about empowering young people to articulate their own strength, find their own anchors, and helping them realize they aren't alone in that storm. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? If these connections are so powerful for teens in crisis, what does that say about the everyday importance of cultivating those bonds for all young people, even those not facing immediate challenges?
That's a great point.
And as we close, I want to leave you, our listener, with maybe a thought. Consider how these reasons for living aren't just relevant for teens in crisis. They're actually a powerful reflection tool for all of us. What are your specific, individualized reasons for living? The things that anchor you, that give you purpose in your daily life? Something to truly ponder. And that is all we have for you today. Thank you for listening. Appreciate your time.